So again, a warm welcome. This episode is talking about Columbia Business School, or CBS as we will refer to it. We'll talk quite a bit about August versus January entry, who fits where, but we also will answer, we have a lot of other questions that we will answer and as well. So I'm going to just dive right in, Melissa, and hopefully then this can become a back and forth. Obviously, you mentioned you're in New York. I spent a lot of time in New York. New York is seen as a financial powerhouse, and therefore Columbia is also seen as a financial powerhouse, and rightly so. But outside of just sheer access to finance, what tangible access does New York City, and what tangible benefit does New York City give students? Just again, beyond that access to finance, that we could probably have a whole discussion about this, but I'll turn to you for the highlights.
Yeah. So do we want to talk about kind of finance or outside of finance to start
Outside
off?
of finance, I maybe a little bit of finance because maybe some of our viewers aren't quite as familiar. But then outside of just sheer finance, what else does Columbia bring?
Perfect. So we'll start with finance because, again, they are known for being a finance school, although they have amazing programs, which we'll talk about in other ways. And I think would like to not be known as just a finance school.
Yes.
But they, just to give some background as why they're known as a finance school, they have 30% of the class that generally comes from finance, financial services, kind of across the board. And generally about 35% graduate into finance. And that's almost always in the top three, so, often behind Harvard and Cornell. Those are the other two that kind of rank pretty high. New York, if for those, I think most people know New York's kind of a financial hub, but I'm a data dork, so I like to, what makes it a financial hub? There's 330,000 people that work in New York in financial services, 200 angel investors. So there's a huge financial network. But outside of finance, Columbia has really strong, just Columbia and New York have really strong tech and life sciences, fashion industries as well. So, Columbia in particular takes advantage of all of this with their executive and residence programs. So a third of those do come from the finance industry, but there's 22 overall, and the rest of them cover industries in healthcare, retail, entertainment and media, government, nonprofit. So they're, and being in New York, there are many companies, even if they're not headquartered in New York, have an office in New York. Google, Meta, Amazon, any tech company has an office here. Just the access to those companies. Many of my clients that have gone to Columbia have taken advantage of an internship. So and Columbia is kind of cool because you can take classes in the evening. So there are more evening classes than there might be in other programs. And that might be because they don't have a part-time program. But you can take classes in the evening and go work during the day and do different internships throughout the city. And I'll pause there because I think I could keep going, but I feel like I'm a little bit of a talking head.
No, I love the data nerd. We are very data driven at Stratus. Obviously, schools are very data driven. So those numbers, the number of angel investors surprised me. I did not quite realize how big that was. So thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah. And just to back up what you were talking about, your clients, some of them who do internships, that always gets me.
I know, tough to roll.
Yeah, it is. The access to New York, the physically being in New York is something that Columbia, as we both know, is really proud of, and they love to hear why students will take advantage of that. And just to talk about some of my clients, what they've taken advantage of, those internships as well, but also the ability just to shadow someone for an afternoon. You don't necessarily have to have a formal program set up. You can just reach out. The alumni network is really supportive. And, hey, Melissa, I'm just uptown. I'd love to sit with you for an afternoon to see what you are doing. That
Absolutely.
access is really nice. Setting up in-person coffee chats. I think Zoom, COVID put so many things online, which were amazing, but it's also really nice to this is a great conversation, Melissa, but I'd much rather be sitting with you and having,
Absolutely.
having a coffee and discussing this instead. And so that in person, that being able to see those industries, not just finance, but as you mentioned, tech, fashion, healthcare, all super important in New York. So I think those are really, really great, great points to bring up.
Can I add one before I think we've got another question? But the other thing that I think is good to highlight is I feel like it's important to look at where schools are spending their money, right? Like what are the centers? And yes, Columbia has a finance center, but they also have a number of other ones. So just again, going that like outside of finance they've got the Eugene Lang Entrepreneurship Center. They've got the Bernstein Leadership and Ethics Center, Paul Milstein Real Estate Center, Tamer Center for Social Enterprise, and the Highland Center for Heilburn Center for Graham and Dodd Investing. I got to get that whole thing.
That's a mouthful.
So yeah, exactly. So that's one around finance, but the other 4 centers are around other big industries that they've put a lot of resources behind and are committed to help students with.
And a real benefit of that as well is many of those centers draw from across the Columbia campus, not just CBS. So you get the benefit of having that nice Columbia cohort, but also can really dive into and tap into experience and resources across campuses, which is just an amazing thing to be able to do.
Absolutely.
If we're ready to move on from there, because we are talking about the finance center, many of the clients that I work with, probably many clients you work with, are bankers and consultants looking to gain access and acceptance to CBS. How do you help them position themselves to really stand out in that pool?
Yeah, and I think this is true probably across most schools, right? Because these are the 2 biggest incoming in most schools. Maybe technology would be a close third, but and you're going to probably hear Lisa and I say this throughout, but we say specificity equals credibility.
Yes.
And really what that means is tell your unique story. I think thinking of specific examples where you can show that you have been collaborative, where you have, built someone else up, help, mentor or support someone else. It is very easy to talk at a high level and generalize your experiences, but unfortunately that helps make you sound like everyone else. And so, really sitting down and thinking of the stories as opposed to, the amounts of money that you invest or the deals that you've done at a high level, right? Resume is a great way to show those impacts. But in essays, talk about one specific deal. How did you have to do? What did you have to learn to do the due diligence? How did you, who did you have to talk to? Did you have a mentor that helped you? And did you maybe help someone else? But be specific about those stories to really help, help yourself stand out in a pool of many. I think also your personal interests. My favorite is the interest line on a resume, and I hear that from a lot of you're.
Me too.
Interviewing it a little bit, so I don't want to steal that thunder, but that's a fun way to differentiate yourself. But also thinking about when you're thinking about how do you want to. I'm jumping ahead and everything, but how do you want to co-create your experience, right? Like, what do you want to get involved in personally too? And that can help you stand out because of your personal experiences.
100%. And also building on that specificity equals credibility, which my clients were like, okay, if I hear that one more time, but it really does, it does make sense. And it really does resonate with them, is making sure that you also add in your impact. So the schools do want to not just see that you were sort of sitting in a seat for a couple years, keeping things warm. Were you actually on that team, additive on that team? And you don't have to have cured cancer or, done something huge, but impacts can be very small. But you just want to make sure that you highlight not only what you did, but what happened as a result of that work. And I think those are important things to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And so on top, just to add to that, is staying
No,
away from the
sure.
proverbial we, right? We all work on teams a lot. Lisa and I work together on, many things. It is okay to talk about that you did something in a team, but you want to be specific about what you did on that team, because if you speak in we's, which we often do, right?
Yes.
This really has no idea what you did. They know what
Right.
the team did. And so, just to, again, be specific.
And there's often, I know we have talked about that, Melissa, there's sometimes a fine line between citing your accomplishments, which if you don't cite them in your own application, other people are going to cite theirs and you're going to lose out. There's that fine line from being sort of a blowhard and really being, humbly stating what you've done. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with, again, taking credit for things that you actually did. So that's a great point to bring up, sort of the royal we versus me.
Right.
I'm going to jump in to something I know that a lot of folks who've signed on for this session are interested in, because Columbia has an interesting January term that they may be one of the few schools that has sort of an off cycle, as we'll call it, an off cycle
in the
entry.
US. Yeah.
In the US. Yes. So to that end, maybe you can give those who, just a quick background on what is J-term, and then maybe talk to us about who would want to apply, who would be a good candidate for that. And then perhaps on the flip side, we can have a conversation about who should maybe avoid that pool of candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. So to take a step back, what is J-term? Most programs, and Columbia does this for their general term, they open an application over the summer, and the first round is due in September, second round is due in January, and in April. So that's kind of a regular August start, and you're always starting in August. Columbia also have what they call their January intake. So the class actually starts in January. The application generally opens in July, so kind of as one of the earliest applications. And they tend to be, well, this year they introduced 2 specific deadline dates. It can also be a little rolling in nature. It's kind of the last evolution of Columbia's old ED practice. But the first deadline was in August, and the second deadline is in October here. And then, we're already starting to see some acceptances in J-term from that first deadline. So that's kind of the application cycle, but then you actually start in January and you do intense core that first spring. And then you take courses over the summer to then catch up, and you catch up with that second year. You do your second year courses with the people that started in the fall before you. So you're it's not, I don't want to say downside. That's what came to my mind. It's not at all. But what's unique about the J-term is that you don't have an internship. So unique compared to other MBA programs. So that kind of leads to who are the right people to be looking for J-term. And I think it is, key to be someone that believes they can find their post-MBA goal without an internship. So it could be that you're staying in the same industry and you are, you don't need the internship. So you're looking to gain more exposure to a certain industry and then grow in management. I've had a couple applicants who wanted to go work for family businesses. So neither of them were in their family business before. They had been kind of working outside of their family business. They wanted to come back and get their MBA and go into their family business. So they obviously didn't need to intern at their family business to work there. So I don't know if you have any other examples of people that, it was the right thing for them to do.
Yeah, I think the key is just you really know what you want to do and you have the skills to do that without
Mhm,
trying something different.
mhm, mhm. So the flip side of who might not
Yeah.
want to
Who
consider.
shouldn't think, yeah, who might
Yeah,
want to reconsider that or
yeah.
not consider it? Yeah.
And I think it probably falls into two camps immediately. And as I talk, I
Hmm.
always tend to find a third. But first being, if you're making a big change or a pivot where admissions might be concerned that you can make this big of a pivot
Hmm.
without an internship, then that's probably, and I think of an example, and we are in a tight job market now. So in general, big pivots are more difficult to do, but with the J term, it would be even more difficult. But, say somebody was in consulting and wanted to go into banking, right? It is a path that it's doable, but you would need an internship with a bank in the summer, most likely to get hired by a bank
Hmm.
post in the long term. I think the second camp would be if you were a little uncertain going into business school, which many people
Hmm.
are, right?
Yes.
We
Yeah.
work with our clients to, we want everyone to be telling as honest and kind of authentic a goal story as makes sense to them. But many people come in with a list of 3 or 4 things that they might be interested in, right? And so if an internship is going to help you decide what that long term, out of your list of what you're interested in, then I think, J term probably isn't best for you because you just don't get that opportunity for an internship to kind of help you identify where you want to be post MBA.
So it sounds like if you really know what you want to do and you already have the skill set and you're very focused, maybe you want to consider J term. If you're a career switcher or a career uncertain, career I won't say unfocused, but not as certain, then
Right.
maybe the J term is not for you. And there's another category because, of course, there has to be that third one because
I
you're
know. I
you're a
knew
former
this.
consultant, right? It would be people separating from the military. You probably are going to want and need to get some civilian experience under your belt before you make that pivot. And it's not necessarily that you don't already have the skills, but just to get that experience in the
Right.
civilian workforce. So I don't
Yeah.
know if that means that you now have a fourth category, Melissa, or if we can sort of move on to the
No.
application
That's
part.
good. I only had 2, so I love that you added
Okay.
the third. That's
Okay,
perfect.
great. Great, great. Folks who listen to these podcasts are always super interested in. Let's get into what's the application itself all about. So now that you know sort of August versus J term, what does the application look like? There's a couple of different essays. The first one is a career goals essay. Melissa, I'll throw that out to you and I'll jump in if I have any additional questions. But so, what advice do you give your clients on the career goals essay?
Yeah. So, and I like the way Columbia asked this question too, because it's really,
Mm,
why are your goals what they are, right? They want to
yes, yes.
understand the why, which I think is inherent in most
Hmm.
essay prompts, but not asked as specifically. And you have 500 words to talk about why. Um, so here, I think it's important to take that time to spend why, right? And that why can be short-term or long-term oriented.
Hmm.
And, um, you know, a structure that I like to think about with a goals essay is kind of starting with the long-term problem that you want to be solving, moving that forward to, okay, this is the role I want post MBA that's going to help me on
Hmm.
that path. And then this is what I'm looking for from an MBA. Um, I think I think it is okay to talk about some specific resource, even though Columbia doesn't ask, why Columbia, that's in their
Hmm.
why Columbia essay, but they only give you 250 words to do that. You don't want the whole essay to be why Columbia. It shouldn't be at all. You really should be talking about your goals. But if there are some specific resources that Columbia has that are going to
Hmm.
help you achieve your goals, then I think, naming those, being specific, don't laundry list. Think of a couple and think about what you specifically are looking to get out of that, as well as what you might be able to contribute. And those
Hmm.
contributions, if you're moving into a new industry, you might not have industry knowledge to to support, but you could, you want to be learning. So you could potentially put together a panel of industry experts, right? And that helps you create those relationships. You're learning, but you're also helping your classmates learn about, a new topic.
Interesting. You mentioned, being a little bit specific about resources you're going to take advantage of. I think that's a great thing. You also want to think about when you're talking about perhaps setting up a panel or something along those lines of, and this gets into a little bit of a different question as well, but what are you going to be able to bring to that process as well? So you want to keep that in the back of your mind when you're going through these. But I think that was a pretty complete answer. I don't think I'd have anything different to add. The second application is talking about this is going to get me, I got to read it, the Phillips Pathway for Inclusive Leadership, or the PPIL. Again, this is an area where it could tend to be generic. So how have you been able to guide your clients to really get them to help them put together a really strong, specific story of mitigating bias, intercultural dialogue, or inclusion in a way that doesn't really just sound kind of generic and superficial?
Yeah, I think it comes to a specific story, some people, this is so inherent, it feels difficult to come up with just one specific example because you want to showcase how much you've done it, which is fine, but that's understandable. But it is harder to see the uniqueness in what you've done and see the absolute action. So I would think of a time when, for example, you mentored someone, talk about the specifics. So think about the STAR method with this one, talk about the specific situation, the task or challenge, STAR, SCAR. What actions did you do? How did you help this individual? And as Lisa mentioned before, on just overall, is your kind of, what are the results that you had? What is the impact that you had on that person, on the situation? So I really think it comes down to being specific. And I don't think there's an example that's too mundane, isn't the right word. What are we talking about? Kind of like that
superficial.
Thank you. Superficial.
Yeah.
That's that. I don't think because I think, talking about a specific time that you helped someone is, you can just showcase your ability to, they're looking for people that are going to enter a classroom and help build bridges and help build connections. And that's really what they're looking for evidence of.
Should we give a specific example here, Melissa? I know I have one. I don't know if you have one.
I would love for you to have a specific.
Would that be helpful? So, and sometimes we shy away from, we talked about videos last week and we both had a similar theme, and then we're worried that people are going to start writing about these in their essays. So this is an example that would be very difficult for anybody else to replicate. So I'm always happy to share it. I work with a client who's very religious, and his parish ended up merging with another parish and his parish was very homogenous, very similar parishioners, very similar ethnic backgrounds, language, etc. They ended up merging for financial reasons with another parish that was of a completely different socioeconomic language, the whole nine yards. And he happened to be, and I'm going to struggle for the language here, like a lector. He would be able to speak in the services, and he really enjoyed that. He'd done that from childhood, and he realized that folks from this new parish were not really volunteering for that. And he took the time to realize that it's because of the language. They didn't really feel that they were very included. They felt that the new parish felt this old parish was thrust upon them. And so he really did a lot of community outreach, had coffee meetings, brought in folks from his parish who actually spoke that other language to really work to help to make these people feel included. And it turned out that they ended up having a lot of high school and college kids volunteering and coming, and then really feeling like they were integrated in the group. So again, that might seem, it's superficial, you're only helping a few people, but gosh, if you can really help just a few people feel really included, you've done good work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, and that's a pretty unique,
Exactly.
experience, first of all.
Exactly.
Just to maybe add an example that's probably maybe not as unique and might come off as kind of superficial, but I've worked with people who, at work, they saw someone who was struggling, and they specifically took time out of their role, even though it wasn't in there. So maybe it was a peer or someone on another team that didn't, they didn't need to help them, and took the time and really helped make that person feel, mentor that person to feel included. So that's, I'm being way more general than you should in your essays in my example. I'm realizing.
Well, we always have to be careful of confidentiality and just making sure
Right.
that these don't end up getting repeated other places.
Right.
But I think that's a great, think about where you might have done that specifically and talk about it specifically. I think that's super helpful. So then the third essay is about co-creation at CBS. And I know sometimes with my clients, there's some confusion, like, what does that actually mean? Am I like, is it about a club? Is it about a center? New York City? How specific, maybe you can help us conceptualize what does that actually really mean? What are they looking for in that? And how specific is specific enough?
Yeah. So I believe most MBA programs are built on co-creation, in that so much of a learning happens outside of the classroom, versus, and I think of I studied engineering undergrad. I had a lot of labs. I did a lot, but a lot of it was in the classroom, where when I was in my MBA, I worked in Bangladesh for 3 weeks. We did projects with companies that were around us. So much of the work that we did was project based, and I think that is the crux of what Columbia is trying to get here. Is you will get out of your education what you put into it. So thinking about where can you showcase that you want to be an active part of your learning process, right? So yes, classroom knowledge is important, and that is the foundation of, especially if you're going into a new industry. But where are, so I think this leans more towards clubs, experiences, centers, if there is some sort of a fellowship or something that can showcase you actually doing, as opposed to just receiving learning. So not to say you can't co-create an experience in a classroom. I guess you could talk about what you would add, but I think it's just a little bit more applicable to more of the interactive type parts of an MBA program. So, for example, if you were looking to go into real estate, right? Could you get involved in the real estate investment fund, and you would bring the knowledge. So I have a client who, well, on paper, he looked like he was doing finance. He had been doing some real estate investment on the side and really wanted to use his MBA to pivot that to his long-term career. So he was able to talk about, getting involved in the real estate investment fund. He actually, on his class visit, he met another student, and they started going into business together on doing
Wow.
So that was co-create, I think, to a level that doesn't necessarily always need to happen. He ended up being a reapplicant, got in the second time, and I think it is really because of the amount of he was co-creating before he even got there. But I do think it's important to be specific from what specific club or experience speaks to you, is going to help you achieve your goals, and then showcase how that you've been thoughtful on how you want to contribute and how you want to either kind of move the mission along, or maybe you have something that you could add. Moving a mission along might be the consulting club, right? If you're looking to move into consulting, in the consulting club, generally second years help first years do case, prepare for the case interviews. And then second year, when you're a second year, you give back and you do that, right? So you're kind of co-creating that experience. And every year they need new leadership and they need new people, to kind of keep that, machine running, versus maybe you get involved in a healthcare club and you have experience in pharma, and there isn't, someone on the board with an expertise in pharma. That's, through a conversation with someone in the healthcare club, you could find that out and talk about how you wanted to grow the reach within the healthcare club. So this is where I think conversations with students can be really helpful, because it really can, and I think it's always important to talk to current students just to understand what's going on in a school, but those conversations can help you really be thoughtful around how you want to co-create, how you want to get involved in a specific club or experience, and showcase that you've talked to someone, been thoughtful about the contribution that you want to make.
Oh, I agree. And I think you want to really be genuine about it. Not that you were implying that you not be genuine, but you had said, what could you really get excited about doing? And I think that comes out in your writing, that comes out when you interview. That's jumping ahead, but if you talk about things in your writing that you are genuinely passionate about and interested in, then it really, really comes across. And I do love the examples you gave about consulting and pharma, real estate, but also think about there's going to be a lot of people with those qualities. So if you happen to do something else that might be a little bit different, you know, they do need new leadership in the consulting club every year, of course. So that is a great thing. But is there, if you are a consultant, is there something else you might want to bring that maybe everybody else doesn't have? So maybe you're doing the entrepreneurship on the side, or maybe you are part of a family business and you can help out in that way as well. So again, trying to differentiate yourself in those pools of what else might you be able to bring to the process. So
absolutely. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. I was foreshadowing, but also is, if you have personal interests, right? There are so many. You can get involved in intramural sports. You could get involved in the wine club, or, New York has a million amazing restaurants. Like, get involved in the foodie club. It's a great way to meet people across industries. But it's another way that you can kind of be a little bit unique on the kind of more the social side of clubs and how you want to get involved.
And that is part of Columbia's pride of being in one of the world's great cities. And they do like to see that you will take advantage of that. Not, you'll move out of sort of northern Manhattan and, go to the outer boroughs or spend some time downtown or midtown or other places. And it's theater. I worked with a client who was a tap dancer, talking about going to the bottom of the resume. That was the first thing that caught my eye when I started working with her. And she discovered a tap dancing studio. I don't know the name of it because that's not my thing, but a tap dancing studio within just a few blocks of the business school campus that she'd heard about. It was apparently very famous, and she really wanted to dig into that and maybe bring in as a stress releaser. People think about doing yoga or whatever, and she thought, for her, that sort of banging her feet and dancing and listening to the music was really, really therapeutic and allowed her to disconnect. So she was going to try to bring groups over to that studio to do classes. So again, you can branch out a little bit just from the strict classes and clubs and profession as well.
Absolutely. You bring up a really good point that I do think it's important somewhere in your essays to showcase that you want to be in New York City.
Yes.
Because, that is, there's other schools, but Columbia and NYU are the two big schools in New York, and I think in particular, why New York is the right place for you to be is a good subtle or overt message to make sure it comes across, because they want people who want to take advantage of New York.
Exactly. Exactly. So speaking of subtle, I think is it a good time to jump into sort of the interview process?
Sure.
So that's a question that we get. A lot of the interviews are alumni led. They're resume based, meaning the interviewer will have just your resume, so they won't have your access to your full file. What are some subtle cues you can send? Both in your application and when you're getting to that interview stage?
So subtle cues to kind of to try and get an interview.
To trigger invites. Yep.
Yeah. I think so. Columbia is a school that the stats are important, right? They tend to have, they're pulled up some of their, they have just recently added the ranges of their scores to their website, which is kind of exciting because before they used to just tell us averages, not ranges. But, while we don't want to focus only on stats because this is a very holistic process, I do think it's important to note that the average for the GMAT is generally around 730. It's 732 this in the last cycle they're reporting, and then the GRE 162 are the averages. But there are ranges, right? So 600 to 780, and then let's see if I do my math, and a composite 289 to 340 from a GRE perspective. So there's a big range, but you want to be the more the bigger pool you are in. I think it's important to think about trying to be in the upper side of that range. From there, I think it is really showcasing the unique skill set that you're going to bring to Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's again, thinking of kind of the larger pools, if you're in consulting, then, what are the specific client engagements that you've had? If it's, if you're banking, what kind of deals have you worked on? If you're outside of those two, Columbia works really hard to get a diverse set of experiences and a diverse group. I mean, New York is an amazing melting pot, and Columbia really wants their program to be a melting pot as well. So, I think making sure that your authentic voice comes through, and showcasing that you've done the research and that Columbia. You do not need to visit unless you're in New York City. That will be my caveat.
Yes.
If you're in New York City and you don't go over and actually do a class visit, I think that unfortunately can send the wrong message.
Yes, for sure.
But Columbia is also a school that I think really likes engagement. So for an example, I was talking about my client who was financial services going to real estate. He applied 1 year. His test scores were below average. He had some issues in undergrad, so his GPA was very low. And often, we kind of say you need one or the other, but he was challenged on both sides. So after he did not get in his first year, he spent significant time. Now he had the benefit of being in New York, so he could do this, but he spent significant time networking. As I said, he made a connection with a student in a class, and they started an investment opportunity together. So I do think there's making those connections and showcasing that you've spent the time to get to know Columbia can be can really help showcase your interest. That they're looking for. How likely are you going to say yes to us? And they want to interview people that they think are going to, are going to come. So,
right. And I think you hit the nail on the head there of, if you don't have the opportunity to visit, you do want to show that interest by engaging with them. And whether that's students, you want to get sort of credit for some of that engagement by signing up for those Zoom or whatever, however they run their meetings, but the admissions workshops, the campus, the information sessions, all those things, you do want to definitely show that. So I think that is sort of the end of our semi-prepared presentation. A quick wrap up. As I said, this is the penultimate in our series. We will have a similar podcast style conversation on Kellogg coming up, so stay tuned for when that is. If you are interested in exploring either Columbia or any other school, definitely reach out to Stratus Admissions. We do offer free half-hour one-on-one consultations. Melissa and I offer them, as well as we've got a team of really well-qualified peers that we work with, and you can reach us on stratusadmissionscounseling.com. Well, and we wish all of you out there in the audience the best of luck in this process.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good luck.